August 30th, 1944. A rainy night near the Belgian border. A massive convoy of U.S. Army trucks is racing through the mud with their headlights off and their markings scrubbed clean. The drivers are terrified, but they aren't running from German snipers. They are running from their own military police. These men are on a mission that could land them all in prison. Under a secret, direct order from General George S. Patton, they are about to commit the largest heist in military history. Patton's tanks are bone dry. Eisenhower has cut him off, and the old blood and guts has decided to become a thief to win the war. 500,000 gallons of fuel are about to vanish. This is the untold story of the great fuel heist of 1944 and the explosive confrontation with Eisenhower that followed. To understand why George S. Patton became a criminal, you must first understand the sheer scale of the logistical nightmare facing the Allied forces in late August 1944. After the spectacular breakout from the Normandy hedgerows during Operation Cobra, the Third Army had turned the war into a high-speed pursuit. They weren't just winning battles, they were obliterating the German Wehrmacht's ability to form a cohesive defensive line. But a modern armored army is a mechanical beast with a terrifying appetite. A single M4 Sherman tank, weighing 30 tons of steel and iron, gets barely 1 mile per gallon of 80-octane gasoline. Patton had hundreds of these tanks, along with thousands of M3 half-tracks, M8 Greyhound armored cars, and the workhorse of the front, the 2.5-ton GMC-CWK trucks. Every single day, just to stay in motion, the Third Army required a staggering 350,000 gallons of fuel. If they entered a combat zone, that number spiked to 450,000. By August 29th, the miracle of the breakout hit a wall. The supply lines were stretched over 400 miles back to the artificial Mulberry harbors and the port of Cherbourg. The Red Ball Express, a desperate round-the-clock convoy system, was collapsing under the strain. Tires were shredding, engines were seizing, and the mud of northern France was turning roads into impassable quagmires. But the real crisis wasn't just the mud, it was the politics. At Supreme Headquarters, a battle of egos was raging. General Dwight D. Eisenhower faced a choice that would determine the fate of the war. He had two racing horses, the aggressive, foul-mouthed Patton in the south, and the cautious, politically powerful Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery in the north. Eisenhower only had enough fuel to keep one of them moving at full speed. Montgomery, the hero of El Alamein, managed to convince Eisenhower that a single massive thrust through Belgium, Operation Market Garden, would end the war by Christmas. Eisenhower made the most controversial call of 1944. He shifted all priority for fuel and supplies to Montgomery's 21st Army Group. On August 31st, the orders reached Patton's headquarters. The Third Army will halt. You will receive no fuel until further notice. To Patton, this wasn't just a strategic error. It was institutionalized murder of the momentum he had built with American lives. Patton's reaction to the halt order was one of absolute, unadulterated fury. He stood in his headquarters near Verdun, staring at tactical maps that showed the German 7th Army in total disarray. He knew that if he stopped now, he was giving the enemy a lifeline. He argued with General Omar Bradley, his voice thick with rage. "Brad, my men can eat their belts, but my tanks have got to have gas. If we stop now, we'll be fighting these same Germans all winter in the snow." But the official channels were dead. The gasoline was being diverted to Montgomery's tanks in the north. Patton wrote in his private diary a quote that still echoes through history. "Eisenhower and his staff are the best friends the Germans have. To sit here and wait is a crime against humanity. Patton realized that the bureaucracy of the Supreme Command was now a greater threat to victory than the German army. It was in this moment of desperation that Patton chose rebellion over regulation. He summoned his chief of staff, General Hobart Gay, and his top G4 supply officers. He didn't ask for a feasibility study. He gave a cold, direct mandate. Get me gas. I don't care how you do it. I don't care who you have to rob. Just get it. Patton's intelligence officers had located a massive fuel depot belonging to General Courtney Hodges's First Army. It was a strategic reserve containing hundreds of thousands of gallons of gasoline in 5-gallon jerry cans, meticulously stacked and guarded. Officially, these supplies were off-limits to Patton. To take them was an act of internal sabotage that could result in a general's court-martial and a permanent end to his career. But Patton didn't care about his stars. He authorized the creation of a provisional truck company. He handpicked his toughest drivers and most deceptive officers, men who were willing to lie to an MP's face and forge a signature to keep the war moving. This wasn't a mission. It was a raid against the United States Army by its own soldiers. The execution of the heist was a masterpiece of military deception. Under the cover of a massive autumn storm, the ghost convoy set out. The rain was lashing so hard against the windshields that the drivers could barely see the tailgate of the truck in front of them. This was intentional. In the dark and the mud, the Third Army trucks were invisible. Every man had ripped his unit patches from his shoulders. Every vehicle had its tactical markings scrubbed clean with gasoline. They reached the First Army depot near midnight. The lead officers didn't act like thieves. They acted with the supreme confidence of men authorized by the highest levels of command. An officer stepped out into the freezing mud, presenting forged requisition papers to a weary, shivering First Army quartermaster. The papers were meticulously stamped with fake Priority 1 clearance from Schoaf. "Emergency redistribution," the officer stated, his voice as hard as the iron of his tank. "We have orders to move this stock to a forward dump immediately. The front is shifting, and we can't afford to lose this fuel to a German breakthrough." The quartermaster, exhausted by weeks of non-stop work and the chaos of the lines, didn't double-check the serial numbers. He saw the official-looking stamps and the unwavering confidence of the officers. He waved the trucks through. For the next 4 grueling hours, Patton's men worked in total silence, passing thousands of heavy jerry cans from hand to hand. They loaded 500,000 gallons of gasoline, but they didn't stop at fuel. Since they were already committing a crime, they decided to make it worth the risk. They liberated crates of K rations, thousands of blankets, and even several crates of spare tracks for Sherman tanks that had been earmarked for Hodges's divisions. As the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, the trucks, now dangerously heavy and sinking deep into the mud, raced back toward the Third Army sector. Patton himself was waiting at the secret unloading point. As the convoy rolled in, he watched the fuel being poured into the bone-dry tanks of the 4th Armored Division. He didn't thank the men. He didn't have to. The roar of hundreds of engines coming to life was the only thanks he needed. He turned to his commanders and gave the only order that mattered. "Fill them up. We move in 60 minutes. The fallout from the heist was immediate and volcanic. The next morning, General Omar Bradley arrived at Patton's headquarters to ensure the halt order was being followed. He expected to find a stationary army and a frustrated general. Instead, he found the Third Army thundering to life. The smell of high-octane gasoline was so thick it was unmistakable. Bradley was a sharp man. He knew exactly what had happened. He looked at Patton and asked, "George, I thought you were dry. How in the hell are you moving? Patton leaned back, putting on his best poker face. Well, Brad, we found some local supplies. My men are very efficient at scavenging from the retreating Germans. Bradley knew local supplies couldn't power a 3-division armored thrust. He knew Patton had likely raided every depot in France. But Bradley also wanted to win. He looked at the maps, saw the breakthrough at the Moselle River, and decided to look the other way. He told Patton, in a quote that defined their relationship, "All right, George, but don't get stuck. If you get stuck, I can't bail you out." However, the ghost trucks had left a paper trail that couldn't be ignored by the bean counters at Supreme Headquarters. Eisenhower's logistical officers were in a state of shock. 500,000 gallons of gasoline had simply evaporated. When the full report reached Eisenhower, witnesses described his reaction as nuclear. He summoned Patton for a face-to-face confrontation. Eisenhower was livid, demanding to know how Patton could justify sabotaging the First Army's logistics and breaking every regulation in the book. Patton stood his ground. He told Eisenhower, "I'd rather be a thief and a winner than a saint and a loser." He pointed to the maps. While Montgomery was stalled in the north, Patton had used his illicit fuel to capture Nancy and establish a critical bridgehead across the Moselle. He had accomplished more with stolen fuel than anyone else had with official supplies. Eisenhower, facing the cold reality of Patton's success, famously remarked, "George, you are a pain in the neck, but you are the only one who fights." Patton was never punished. His victory was too valuable to the Allied cause. Those 500,000 gallons of stolen gas allowed the Americans to punch through a defensive line that would have taken months to break otherwise. Patton proved that in the chaos of war, the greatest crime isn't breaking a regulation. It's standing still and letting the enemy breathe. He chose to be a criminal for a cause, and in doing so, he saved thousands of lives that would have been lost in a prolonged winter campaign. He broke the laws of man to fulfill the law of victory.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Drop a comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.